First thing I do is I open it up. If I'm on like a narrative thing, I'll just open it up wherever I am, because it's nice to build the camera on the tripod. But before you do that, you got to open it up and see if you're missing anything, see if anything's broken, anything's gonna tip over, that kind of thing. A lot of times on like live productions, I don't have a choice where the tripod's gonna go. So even if I build the camera on the tripod, I'll probably have to move the tripod later to put it on, you know, like a platform or something. But you know, I like to build the camera on the tripod just because it's good working height. First thing I do when I open it is I check all the locks. I check the spreader, make sure nothing's broken. A lot of times when I'm doing broadcast stuff these days, something is broken, and you know, it's not like you can get a new tripod. So a lot of times it's just gaff tape and hope for the best. But yeah, just make sure everything's gonna work. And once I've put the actual camera on it and it's heavy, I'll check it again to make sure, especially like the leg locks don't slide away on me, that kind of thing. Sometimes you can adjust, but a lot of times you just gotta hope for the best. So the next thing I do is I'll add the pan arm, and I have a couple different ways I do it. For narrative, I usually just use the one pan arm because I like to, you know, if I'm gonna be operating the camera, I like to be able to, you know, have the camera in one hand and the pan arm in the other hand. Maybe I'll operate the lens or operate the follow focus, so I'm close to it. A lot of times I'll even have it up against my body. And then if it's broadcast, I'll go ahead and add the other pan arm if it's available. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is I'll go ahead and build the camera or mount the camera, you know, however much I need to build it. And what I like to do is I put the camera on and I sort of get it to where I think it's gonna be, and I go ahead and balance it. A lot of tripods do have like a counterbalance system. Even before I mess with the counterbalance system, I go ahead and try to balance the camera just freely, which means I'll loosen up the tilt function and try to get the camera sort of in a good spot. That way, you know, if the counterbalance doesn't work or if the counterbalance fails or whatever, I still have sort of just neutral balance. It's just, you know, it's easier to work on a camera when you're operating it when the camera's neutral anyway. Even when I'm building the camera, I don't usually lock the pan and tilt functions. I basically never lock pan and tilt, with the exception being if I'm gonna walk away from the camera for a while, then I will lock the tripod. But otherwise, I just sort of max out the resistance on pan and tilt. That way it's, you know, it has some give, but it's not locked down. Honestly, these days, most of the broadcast tripods I'm using, the actual pan and tilt lock levers are broken anyway, so it'll still move. So yeah, but it's my preference to get the resistance all the way maxed out, just because this, at least, you know, if somebody sees the camera moving, then you can intervene. But most of the time, the tripod head is strong enough that it's just going to keep it there anyway. So my logic with building tripods, it's comfort. On narrative stuff, you know, you're kind of just putting the camera wherever you need to put the camera, so it could be an awkward situation. But on broadcast stuff where you're going to be operating the camera the whole time, you know, building the rig so it's actually physically like ergonomic and comfortable is kind of a big deal. So a lot of times in live broadcasts, you're actually operating a whole rig where you have zoom and iris on one handle and then focus on the other handle. And so I like to actually make the handles sort of like, if I'm standing up, sort of like resting height for me. So actually way down low. And then you just got to make sure you balance the camera to compensate. That way I don't have to lift my arms too much, because, you know, you're going to be doing the same operation over and over again. So you just want to sort of minimize the amount of just muscle work, because you're going to get fatigued, you're going to get tired. Okay, so once your camera is sort of built up and sort of set up the way you want it, I go ahead and I go through the tripod one more time to just make sure everything's tight, everything's set up so the handles are tight, the locks are tight, and it's not sagging. Maybe I'll do a little bit of an earthquake test. I'll go ahead and level the head again, because sometimes the camera sags, and so I'll put some kind of level on a flat spot on the camera and make sure I'm leveled. And then once I've done my earthquake test and make sure the legs don't slide, this is where I'm actually comfortable walking away, where I will actually lock the locks for the pan and tilt. But even then, I keep my tripod almost completely maxed out on resistance. So that way, if somebody comes over and bumps it, it doesn't really move anyway. And then the very last thing I do is I make sure my cable runs are not going to interfere with anything. On a narrative thing or a commercial, maybe I'll tidy them up to make them look pretty because people don't like mess. But on broadcast stuff, it's more just to make sure the cables don't interfere with the camera or pull out or anything, and somebody's not going to trip on a cable and take the whole thing down. And that's really what it is. You know, it's not really a lot of steps because it's just a constant sort of evolution of how I go building the camera. The one thing to know is if it's a really big broadcast camera with really long handles, a lot of times if I can move the monitor, I'll put the monitor down on the handle so that way I can either sit down or I can be farther away from the camera to avoid shake and that kind of thing. But in narrative mode, it's kind of the opposite. You want to be, you know, hugging the camera as much as you can, which, you know, get rid of the handles maybe. Very, very small package, but most of the time I'm, you know, sitting in the back of the room on a riser, just barely moving the camera, and, you know, whatever I can do to sort of keep my hands off of it, but also leave it balanced is kind of the sweet spot. So that's what it is. So refresher, open the tripod, see if it's broken, try to fix it if you have to. Put the camera on it, build the camera, get it balanced, get it in the shape you want. Get the handles in the right place, you know, do an earthquake test, check your pan and tilt to make sure you're in sort of the sweet spot of how tight you want everything. And then finally, if you have to walk away from the rig and you can't take the camera with you, that's when I actually lock the pan and tilt levers, but that's kind of the only time. I don't even lock the pan and tilt levers when they're in the tripod bag. I keep everything unlocked and I just max out the resistance because, you know, movement is safer than breaking off a handle, which happens all the time, especially because these things are under a ton of tension. So I don't know. What do you guys think? Is this too anal? Is this too ridiculous? Or is this how you guys do it? Let me know.